I just want to kind of mention that yesterday was kind of a milestone in my life because one of my real role models, Dame Diana Rigg, passed away. And she was one of the reasons I actually got into martial arts because of her Emma Peel character. And sort of always been a role model, for me because she was always very independent. I think she was the first, major star to actually play a nude scene in a play. She Abelard and Heloise. And I remember, for whatever reason, it came to the United States, and it was in it was in Los Angeles. Didn't come up to Northern California. If it did, I definitely would have gotten I would have gone. Right. I was actually thinking what I should do is fly to Southern California to see the play, but I didn't do it. And of course, it played on Broadway. And I kind of remember it was kind of interesting. There was a TV Guide article that was written about her by, I believe it was Isaac Asimov. And he kind of described, that he actually went to see her in the play, probably back east, and there he was, invisible to the audience, kind of, and she was kind of doing this nude scene. And I remember she was on the Dick Cavett show, and Dick Cavett kind of, he addressed it in kind of a comical way. And he kind of was talking about, the character, about how police in England were called peelers. And there's some obscure reference that I've since forgotten. And that her character was Emma Peel, right? And so he says, what about that nude scene you're doing on Broadway? And she kind of blushed, and then she kind of started talking about it, and mainly just said things like, it was pretty chilly, or could get very chilly. And she was with, Paul, I can't remember the guy's name, probably come to me. But, like they're in bed, Abelard and Heloise, okay? And there's a kind of, it's pretty much dark, even though, they're playing a nude scene, And she said, all of a sudden, the lights go on, right when they're on stage. And so they kind of whispered, he says, what should we do? And so she says back to him, I think we should get under the covers more. And so, they played the scene, even though the light wasn't supposed to go on. But, she was always, not just, the spy character, but she just always played usually very, her whole life was about being very independent. And that was just something that I always really appreciated, and so I didn't necessarily decide when I was going to be a certain age, I was going to be a martial arts teacher, mainly Aikido, now Tai Chi also. I've been both really. And a lot of it was because of her. And she was always very independent. She was always extremely opinionated, okay? Very honest, very frank, very intelligent. And so, it was a big thing for me. Yesterday, I usually kind of turn my iPad on, and there's a whole bunch of stuff on the screen that comes up before you actually open it up, CNN and various things. If you got, a text or email, it kind of lets you know. So right at the top was, that Diana Rigg had passed. I just remember the first thing I saw, basically when I woke up, turned the iPad on to see what's going on in the world. And there's major coverage of her in The Guardian. So, it was kind of a sad day, okay? Still sad. But that part of it, she was a very, very important for me, very important, Okay, so, I mean, kind of, if I kind of look at, just in terms of people, that are kind of very important, I'm talking about not necessarily people in my immediate life, but she's right there. Of course, O Sensei, who I never met, is right there. Chet Baker, the trumpet player, is right there. And yeah, probably I would list him that way, although it's more recent. And he's a lot younger, is Stephen Curry. And I'm just talking about my own personal sense where sometimes you kind of bond to a celebrity, okay? And, they reflect something of what's inside you, okay? And so, it was a shock, and it was, I'm still kind of in shock about it. I didn't realize, that she, was battling cancer. I guess it was diagnosed in March. And that finally, according to her family, she died peacefully. Her daughter, Rachel Sterling, is also an actress. And in fact, I thought it was interesting. I always had the impression my daughter, Jennifer, was born in 1978. And I was under the sense that we both became parents, she and I, the same year. And I found out that Rachel was born the year before, 1977. But that part of it's always, to me, I mean, it's just in terms of your own timeline. And I remember Mary Heine Sensei, because, I go there to Japan, and she finds out I'm really a Diana Rigg, Emma Peel fan. Immediate bond. Immediate bond, right? That was like right there. And so, I'm in Japan, very, very country Japan, those days, English, you have to have your own books or stuff, And so Linda Holiday, since was teaching a high school girl English. Linda was, what I found, for example, is that, English teachers, you can make some money teaching English. Nobody wanted me because I wasn't entertaining, but, if you're Americans, more exotic. And so she was teaching this young girl English. So we get invited over as part of, just the parents being social. And I'm there with Linda, and there was another American man named Dick. And so we go to this young girl's house, and there's a copy of Time Magazine International. This is English, So you go on, I start, and it's almost like I open that, just not at the beginning, just open it. And the theater section. And it really details Diana Rigg's work on the theater. And a lot of things would always go that way. I would like not open a newspaper for a while, not just in Japan, but all of a sudden, and there would be an article about her. And so, part of that, I kind of mentioned the thing about Time Magazine to Mary Sensei. And so she said, "Oh, Jack, you and she have a powerful N." And an N means it's kind of like a faded connection. And, Hikizuchi Sensei used to always say, if you train here in the Shingu Dojo and you have a powerful inner connection to O Sensei, he was always very big on that. So Mary said, well, you got a powerful connection to her, right? And so I remember that same year, 1973, the summer, she actually got married, which was kind of a shock, because there was an article in TV Guide where she kind of said, I respect the institution of marriage, but it's not for me, right? And I think the guy who wrote the TV Guide article said something like, you know, lady, thou art the cruelest she alive. If you leave the world without a copy, in other words, you just leave us and don't leave and you know, like a child, right? You know, and so she kind of giggled and said, "There's still time, right?" And so she did have Rachel, all right, and but that was summer of 1973, and right about, I mean, a lot of this stuff you kind of get, you know, when people come through. So it's a group of foreigners that came to Shingu for a week to do a week-long Gospel training, and so I found out, oh, she got married. And then I find out that Bruce Lee died. And that was like within about that same period of time. So, you know, my world goes, right there. Because, you know, you just don't get news. I mean, it's not like, you know, now there's international stuff. But in the, you know, where we were, you know, the news was all in Japanese about Japan. And, you know, news of what was going on in the outside world, we would get some information about, you know, Watergate was happening. And that was kind of in our, you know, we would write letters and get letters back. And so if you wrote a letter, you sent the letter, you calculated in 8 days if somebody immediately read the letter, wrote, you know, a reply and mailed it, you get it in 8 days. So you just kept on hoping, you know, in 8 days you get an answer for a letter. And so people like Robert Frazier, I actually wrote Master Choi a couple of times, you know, my Tai Chi instructor. And that was about it, you know, I mean, so anything about that. So you're just, but it was almost like wherever I was, I'd always find out what was going on with her, you know, for some reason. And I do know that, you know, I mean, today's 9/11. She passed away yesterday, 9/10. I remember, you know, in, you know, that night, the night before I found out, I woke up and there was just a lot of energy around, right? Just a lot of energy. And I, you know, I don't think it was a visitation, you know, I've never really met her. But, you know, I could tell something was going on. And I remember when her co-star, Patrick McNeid, passed on, I found out about it when I opened Facebook because somebody posted it. And I just remember that whole day I was feeling kind of weird, you know, and so I kind of commented on that. Just, yeah, I've been feeling weird all day. Now I know why. But they were a really good team because, you know, one of the things about it is that there's a woman, okay? McNeid was the star. You know, he was original cast, all right? And then, you know, he was with this guy, I can't remember his name, but he played a character called Dr. Keel. And he was considered, you know, the real action. He did all the stuff. And Steve was kind of this secret agent that would draw him into these things. And so this guy retires. And then Radical, they bring Honor Blackman in. And she's good, but she leaves after 2 years. And so they don't know what to do. So they come up with, who are we going to get? And so one of the producers says, whoever she is, she has to have M appeal. You know, I mean, it's kind of a sexist term, M meaning man appeal, sex appeal, right? And so, you know, the character, Emma Peel. And the character was initially cast, and the actress that was cast as her was Elizabeth Shepard, who was this real tall, very statuesque blonde. And they had this vision of her actually walking around with a bow and arrow, and, you know, and it didn't work. it didn't work. She was, she kind of didn't have something. Okay, and I guess in analysis, it was more like she really couldn't handle the humor. I mean, there was always this interchange in between Steed and Honor Blackman. Apparently, Steed changed quite radically because basically what he was always trying to do with Honor Blackman was to pick up Kathy Gale. There was kind of that obvious sort of sexual push from him, And then with Diana Rigg, it was very different. And apparently what happened is she auditioned, did not get the role, kind of showed up and did her test and said, this is all a waste of time, isn't it? And the people there said, yeah, I guess it is. But what happens, it didn't work out with Elizabeth Shepard. In fact, they filmed 2 episodes with her and scrapped them. And then somebody remembered Diana Rigg from her test. And so they brought her in and retested her. And they realized she had a really good rapport with Patrick McNee. And that was it. She was Emma Peel. And I remember my original sense, was the Avengers was coming. So I said, oh, because I'd seen the movie Goldfinger, where Honor Blackman is in it. And I thought, oh, wow. And so, I'm watching the screen credits, right? John Steed, top professional, and his partner, and I'm expecting Honor Blackman to come out in black leather, and it's Emma Peel. And then I remember going, oh. And then the first episode, watch the second week, and I started to, get a feel for the show a little bit, because I didn't know what to make of it the first week. It was about, automated assassins, the cybernauts, and there was a karate scene, where Mrs. Peel is investigating these murders where somebody is killed with a blow to the neck, so thinking karate, right? So she goes into a, karate school, karate dojo. And then this man comes out. I can't remember his name now, but he was kind of like Patrick Stewart before Patrick Stewart's bald head. Michael Hollis, I think. Hollis is the last name. I used to know all the casts of all the episodes, but, time has eroded that. And so, she kind of goes in there, and she's kind of dressed in a short skirt. And so, this guy, and they refer to him as sensei, not sensei. So it was not terribly well done at that level, but, and so he goes over and says, what can I do for you, Mrs. Peel? And she says, I'm interested in karate. And so he says, interest is for the onlooker. From our students, we demand dedication, nightly attendance for practice and demonstration. And she looks at him and says, I can appreciate that. And he looks at her and says, appreciate too, Mrs. Peel, that karate, unlike judo, is not a sport. It is a science, an art, a discipline. And then, he kind of goes, boom, he hits something and says, one of our students, a man named Oyama, can split a tile with a single stroke. He looks at her and says, in such surroundings, a woman can hardly compete. And so, she kind of looks at him and says, but it's the very aspect of competition that appeals to me, so, they have this exchange. And so he calls this person in, Oyuka, Mrs. Peel was just leaving. And so it's a woman. And then so Mrs. Peel says, well, it makes Oyuka the exception, right? And so the sensei, Michael Hollis, says, Oyuka, the immovable one, is a first dan in judo, a third dan in karate. Few men could pass her if she did not wish it. And Mrs. Peel looks at the sensei and says, and if I could? Then he says, if you could, you would be most welcome here. So they kind of square off. And, they do a couple of moves. And finally, what was kind of interesting is Mrs. Peel kind of moves in and she actually gets the placement for a kaiten, nage. And then what she does is she goes, boom, which is a strike. She doesn't actually hurt, which means she's clearly won. And it's interesting that what she did is actually kind of an Aikido move, boom. Because, kaiten, kaiten nage, there's a knee to the face or a chop to the back. But then, after she's clearly lost, Oyuka tries to kind of get Mrs. Peel by grabbing her leg, and Mrs. Peel goes boom and does the full kaiten. And then, of course, Mrs. Peel, wins, so she's accepted in the class. And so, that's a very early reference. There wasn't much reference to martial arts. Most of what you saw Honor Blackman do was judo, right? She actually got brown belt level. Mrs. Peel, the martial arts, if you look at it, is, it's studio choreographed. And there are a couple of episodes where she looks really good, and a couple of episodes like, I look at them and I go, it's her. There's something she had that she kind of sold the role. So she kind of was that, and the movements are choreographed. I mean, I kind of said, if I were, for example, going to be the fight coordinator, we would use, in those days, karate, and judo was sort of beginning to be wrong, but karate was mysterious. And what was kind of interesting was the third season, which is where they shifted into color. They actually, shifted and said instead of karate, which was sort of like her first year, with black leather, she did a lot of karate moves, right? Some judo, but, it was kung fu. And then, it was actually, some of the stuff, was supposedly Tai Chi. Like, what I would do is, at the end of, or the beginning of the episodes, they would have her kind of doing various poses. Like this is one. And then, kicking and striking a little bit like that. And so it was just, it's background, silhouette. And, there was something that she had. I mean, if you were to ask me who was better, Bruce Lee or Diana Rigg, I mean, obviously I say Bruce Lee was the better martial artist. Diana Rigg was the better actor. Okay? So I thought we'd go into the other room and now that we are somewhat set up, and we will try to get a full body shot. Okay. Yeah, so we're right where we normally are. For whatever reason, I kind of took this and boom, 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 boom. And I use this a lot. One, because you don't have to worry about breaking a lamp or something. And you can use something of any length. But one thing we were doing was we were kind of taking a move. Like, for example, I just did that motion. Sweep, cut, cut. Sweep, cut, cut. Starting with the right, sweep, cut, cut. Sweep, cut, cut. Sweep, cut, cut. Back leg, sweep, cut, cut. Okay, now sweep, boom, cut, cut. Sweep, cut, cut. You can, or sweep, cut, cut. You can take those three moves, boom. Now somebody's coming at you, or you've got a variety of people here, you sweep, right? Now, if there's one over here, cut, and then somebody else coming in, cut. Sweep, take the person in the middle, cut, and you do it, boom, cut, cut. So, as movements go, sweep, cut, cut. Try that a couple times. Try not to break anything. Okay, anybody with a question or statement about this? Sweep, cut, cut, or sweep, cut, cut, or sweep, cut, cut. Anybody?
I've got kids running around through the house at the moment, so.
Yeah, you don't want to hit your kids. Okay, it's all right. Sweep, cut, cut, thrust. Sweep, cut, cut. Thumbs face each other. Thumbs face, thumb away, thumb face each other. Thrust. Sweep, cut, cut, 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 thrust. Try that a couple times. All right? Get an opening sequence. And you add to it. Try it. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom. So just start to move.
Okay, Sensei,
Yes.
at the raised part at the end, right before the back thrust, I couldn't quite see what you were doing because you were close to the camera.
Well, okay, so we're sweeping, cut. No change of grip. It's going the other side, cut. Thumbs face, thumbs away, thumbs face, thrust. So, oh, good. Oh. Okay? Give it a try. Is that a little clearer, Cliff?
We had a parade come through while you were explaining it, but I think I got it. Let me try.
But give it a try. Okay. So we have a movement: sweep, cut, cut, thrust. Now, thumbs face away from each other. Thumbs face you. Thrust. Thumbs face away. Thumbs face you. Thrust. So sweep. Thumbs face away. Thumbs face towards you. Thrust. This, for example, thrust is here, but we also have two thrusts, or we have a thrust and a thrust back. Remember? Okay? Okay. And it may take you a little bit. The changes themselves, you pull, 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 Well, so far we have sweep, cut, cut, thrust, sweep, cut, cut, boom. Huh? Okay. All right. There's sweep, cut, cut, thrust. Here. And that's a tidy little package. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Any questions on that one? The structure itself, right? We're kind of learning. There's a pattern. Boom. 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 But that structure, has a flow to it. Boom. Right? Boom. Boom. There's a flow to it. Right? Boom. 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 So ultimately, what you kind of want to do is you want to get to that place, where you have the changes down, where it's really the staff or spear or the sword. That's moving. Boom, 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 boom. There are movements within movements. But let's go back over it again. So there's a sweep, a cut, a thrust, and that motion. And so some of this stuff, if you just remember the pattern and do it, you actually, if you can't remember the pattern later, you'll probably start to create your own movements off of it. Okay? Okay. So boom, 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 boom. And after what, the movements sort of build on themselves. The improvisation. So let's go over our pattern again so far, which is cut, cut, thrust, rethrust. Okay, all right. Let me check in. Yeah, don't leave. What I'd like you to do, now see if you can get that place where the movements, like the staff moves. All I'm trying to do is support the staff as it's in its motion. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. So nice and easy within that. Boom, boom. So even though we're here, it's not a set posture. It's very boom, 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 boom. So there's that place where you're just holding it, the staff, in some sense, is leading. And the Michael Moorcock stories, Elric's facing an army, what does he do? He lets Stormbringer lead. Okay? Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Okay, let's pause for a bit. Anybody with a statement or question? Getting that loose. Getting that loose. Which means, you know, in the Do Sensei parlance, the eye becomes increasingly easier. Okay? A couple of things, you know, I mentioned people who can influence me, right? You know, just in terms of my own world, you know. Chet Baker. And what he, one time somebody asked him what he thought of the, you know, the young group of trumpeters coming up. And I think what he said was something like, lots of technique, no soul. Lots of technique, no soul. And another related, we're going to put them together, man named Herb Alpert, who did the Tijuana Brass. Da 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 da. You know, really, really catchy kind of combination of mariachi and pop and jazz, right? Sold tons of records. Became a media mogul, had his own recording company, A&M Records. He sold it for millions and did a bunch of things. And so he comes up to Baker, you know. I mean, this guy is a great commercial success, all right? And he goes up to Chet and says, Chet, will you teach me how to improvise? And Chet Baker says, I can't, Herb. Improvisation is governed totally by imagination or lack thereof. Okay, so they're kind of connected, okay? My sense, there's mind and body, okay? When I first started, into my first academic year of Aikido was in the spring, Koichi Tohei sensei came over. It was in San Mateo. It was a group gathering. There really weren't very many schools, so they rented a high school gymnasium and they put mats out. And he was 10th degree black belt from World Aikido headquarters. And he got out there and his legs were like pillars and people would come in, boom, they go flying. And so a bunch of us were talking about it afterwards. And Robert Fraser came by and said, oh, you guys are actually talking about Tohei sensei like he's O sensei. He said, no, he's not. As good as he is, he's not O sensei. And so, you know, so somebody asked Robert Fraser sensei, well, what's the difference? And Robert Fraser sensei said, oh, Tohei sensei is too strong. Has a lot of burn. It's personal. And then that was it, right? And so we were having a discussion as to what O sensei might have that Tohei sensei didn't have. And we kind of came to a group conclusion that Tohei sensei was mind over body. All right? In other words, you know, instead of just developing the body, mind leads the body. Boom. And so, he had the physical body, but, the mind, boom, would direct the key, boom, through that physical body, mind over body. And then we came to the conclusion that what O-sensei had was soul over mind. And one of the attributes, see, mind is mind. Okay? But I don't know that the mind has imagination. Imagination comes from the soul. And so one of the things about it, boom, 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 staff just moves. All right? And there's changes that are happening that are very quick. Boom, boom, boom. This 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here, boom, boom, boom. It's about 8 moves. And that's, you can say the mind is processing it faster. But it's almost, for me, like when the staff it's just moving, boom, boom, boom. That's the imagination seeding the mind, and the body operating off of those. So the imagination is kind of gateway from mind to something you might call a soul, or a real deep level of self. So boom, 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 boom. Well, sensei, move like a beam of light, 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 move like a beam of light. Fly like lightning, fly like lightning, fly like lightning, strike like thunder, strike like thunder, strike like thunder. Move in circles around the stable center. Boom, boom, boom. Each of those, for example, there's this circle, but then again, there's a shift to another circle without stopping. Boom, 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 boom. So if I read O-sensei, his description of those things requires imagination. Imagination is already the soul coming through mind, which then, of course, leads the body. So as we're kind of doing this sort of motion, boom, 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 I mean, the computations that you have to have as it gets rid of them, boom, 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 boom. All right, my mind doesn't compute at that speed. At least mine doesn't. Yours might. But it's guided almost by the fact there's an imagination. Boom. Stillness goes into motion. And motion splits into circles. Each of those circles around the stable center here, you can switch tracks from circle to circle. Boom, 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 boom. Outwardly, what you get are waves and spirals. Okay? Anybody with a question or? Okay, what we're going to do is, I promised my daughter I would be more professional. So we're going to, basically, this is all volunteer. We're going to go into the other room, but that's the class. Okay? I told her, she says, Dad, you go. Yeah, so it's a little late, but, my daughter, be more professional, Dad. I said, okay, I'll be more professional. All right. All right. What's kind of interesting is that my daughter right here. I always try to infuse in my daughter an appeal. And so, she kind of, I guess, says she bosses me around these days. Because she has a lot more common sense than I do. But that thing there about soul over mind, I think is an important one. I mean, that what Chet Baker said, trumpeters, I like to do that stuff, although I'm very limited at it. Chet had enough technique to express himself. One time he and Art Frank, they're going to some jazz symposium or something. And they're listening to everybody warm up, and Art says he's getting freaked out because there's all this incredible technique there. And so, he kind of, I think Chet kind of picked up on the fact Art was kind of feeling a little overwhelmed, right? Maybe I'm out of my league. You're a jazz legend, but I'm out of my league, right? And so apparently Chet told him something like, all the chops in the world, technique chops, doesn't matter if you can't tell your story. All the techniques, all the technical mastery out there, doesn't matter if you can't tell your story. One thing that I will say, about Dame Diana Rigg, it's almost like, the character, whatever it was, came through her. Now, the question is she Emma Peel? Was she Emma Peel? Because she's since passed, the actress. I would say yes and no. The role itself is kind of interesting because, she was succeeded by a very young actress. I think Linda Thorsten's like about my age or a year older than I am. She's Canadian. And I used to hate watching her because I would just kind of go, she's not Mrs. Peel, but she definitely wasn't. And it's interesting, if I watch her now, she was okay. She was okay. But, you don't follow Emma Peel and Dame Diana Rigg with okay. So, there's an area where it's not just about looks or ability to be on stage. There's kind of that ability, whatever role Diana Rigg played as an actress, she was telling her story through that character. That's what made her a real fantastic actress. And, for me, you kind of her use of language. Certain things. I mean, just, as you can tell, I actually watched some of those episodes so much that I actually somewhat semi-memorized dialogue from some of those episodes. And years ago, they did a movie. They cast Uma Thurman as Emma Peel and Ray Fiennes as John Steed. And it was a real disappointing film. And so I just said, I don't really want to have that as my lasting memory of those characters. So I kind of did a story. I wrote it, just to write it, called it Mrs. Peel, You're Needed. It was kind of an autobiographical fantasy, in which case, all of a sudden, okay, me, I kind of materialize her here. And I had a lot of, I said, I would really like to write an Avengers episode, but I could never do it because, it's a British show. And then what happened is kind of interesting because it wasn't like, I don't understand, British culture or anything. It's so British. So I placed the story in what Deepak Chopra called the field of infinite possibilities. That, an intention goes into the field. It kind of draws and gets some substance, forms a wave, becomes a space-time event. And so all of a sudden, Emma Peel appears in my life. And so she kind of said that, yeah, for whatever reason, you put out a strong enough intention, went into that field, kind of coalesced a bit into a wave, and a space-time event was created, and so I'm here with you. And so what happened is that, you know, in that particular thing, when I bring her in, I bring something else in. And so all this weird stuff starts to happen. And so there was one villain, the only one in there that actually seemed to make her afraid was this guy. It's an episode called The Joker. And it was a war criminal named Max Prendergast who really wanted to kill her because he fell in love with her. And she kind of used that to get him captured. So he wanted to kill her. And so in that story, as I bring her in from that field, I also bring him in. And what was really interesting to me was, I've kind of actually, a couple of people have read it. You know, it's not meant for any sort of mass. You know, I probably run into copyright problems, you know, because you're not supposed to use the character. You can write fan fiction. That's what it is. But the dialogue was real easy. All I had to get out of the fact was that, you know, I would never do an Avengers episode because, you know, it was British, and I would not try to understand British culture and that British slant. But it was almost like I could write Mrs. Peel. She was so deep inside me that you know, I could just, you know, because most of that dialogue I'd sort of memorized, but to kind of use that in other situations and to create situations, and everything would come out of that field. So it was just about getting everything in order. And so to get the universe back in order, we have to kind of come together and face this character that came in when I pulled her in. And that was the premise of the story. Okay, call it Mrs. Peel, you're needed. And that was amazing. That you know, it was just, she was the easiest for me to write, because all I had to do was just sort of clear, and you know. So anyway, today I guess is sort of a Dana Rigg appreciation class. Anybody with any thoughts? Anybody watched the show or influenced by the show at all?
I just want to say my condolences. I mean, I know you didn't know her, but when I read that she had died, I immediately thought of you.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm like, that's gonna impact
emails and text. Yes, you know.
So you know, my M appeal is probably Agent 99 from Get Smart. I still love Barbara Feldon, who is still with us. And I thought that character was, I mean, I imprinted on, I didn't see Avengers as a small kid, but I saw Get Smart as a small kid because it was funny, right? And it had John Adams and all that. But 99 is just like, oh, 99, you know, she's just so awesome. So
I watched that show too.
Yeah.
You know? In fact, they were on about the same time.
Yeah,
you know?
right.
But I think when you're a kid, right, The Avengers was, you know, for the first 2 years was on at 10 at night.
Right. So
and so Get Smart was on, you know, like 8 or 8:30 or something. So
I think my dad liked Get Smart, so you know, it was on. So, but you know, I mean, it was, spy movies were big, right? James Bond and all that was occasionally on TV, the older James Bonds. But I really loved Get Smart because it was a short, you know, it was 30-minute show, humorous, and Barbara Feldon kicked butt in that show. It was just
I kind of sort of remember she didn't really register that much for me. You know, it was just you know, but you know, that's all individual, right?
Sure.
But I do know that, you know, the actual, one thing I wrote a thing for Facebook, actually played, you know, the Avengers theme. And it was kind of, you know, there was one episode. It was from Venus with Love. It was the very first color episode that was shown. It was funny, to get the American market, the second year was color. Diana Rigg kind of shifted from black leather into these sort of, these jumpsuits, and which I preferred, actually. I like the jumpsuits better than the black leather. So there's this one part of it, which is just background music, where they get a trumpet solo to play the Avengers theme. And, it's beautifully done. It's just a couple of bars. And there's also, last night we watched the last episode that she did, called The Forget Me Not, where she leaves the show and leaves Steve and goes back to her husband, who was supposed to have died in a plane crash in the Amazonian jungle, but he resurfaces after a couple of years, so she goes back to him, and it's really sad. I mean, what happened is, when I watched that, it was March the 20th on 1968, watched it with my parents. I just went to my room and I cried. Yeah, and I found out later that, when they filmed that episode, right, Patrick Macnee, because it was her last episode, they'd shot a couple of episodes with the new girl, a lady named Linda Thorson, okay? But they brought Diana Rigg back to shoot the final one. And so, I think at that time, when that shooting was over, apparently Macnee went into his dressing room and just cried. And so I always remembered that. And the nice thing about it, at the very end of the show, she says goodbye to him. And then there's a scene where she's her husband is picking her up, and this man is dressed in a bowler hat and driving a Bentley. And later I found out that Macnee had shot that scene as her husband. And so, it was kind of bittersweet. The thing that really bothers me more than anything else, right, is that he wrote a book called The Avengers in Me, and he recounts how this was a couple of years later, after the show was done. All right, that Diana Rigg comes up to him and says, Patrick, because apparently that last year that she was on the show, he was embroiled in a lot of marital stuff. He was married to a British actress named Kate Woodville. And don't ask me why I remember that. It's just that, it was like, and apparently the marriage was not going well. And so, he was kind of just caught up, emotionally consumed by the approaching failure of his marriage. And so, what Diana Rigg says, Pat, and that's what it is she kind of felt like she wasn't getting the support of the directors. Okay, so it's a combination of Macnee, who she's very close to, being kind of a little more distant because he's kind of in his own emotional stuff. I mean, you can imagine, I've been through a marriage that failed, and you just feel awful.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you just feel awful. I mean, I got a daughter out of that marriage, and that's fantastic. I have a granddaughter out of that marriage, and that's fantastic. But the actual not working out, with a partner, that you've committed to and married, that was hard. And so I understand where he might have been. But, what it is, she just said is, Patrick, if you hadn't been so with, that crummy marriage and trying to do all that stuff, says, we would have been a lot solider. I would have felt more supported, and I would have stayed on the show for about 2 more years. It would have been great. And my own thought at that point was, oh my God, no Linda Thorson, Tara King, 2 more years of Emma Peel. But the thing was, when she left, there was a huge void in me. And so, that's one of the reasons I started, my first art was, karate, because I associated that with the show, right? So, there was a guy who was a student at UC Santa Cruz who was a shogun, Japanese, utterly crazy. And so, he kind of viewed me as Japanese, even though I was American born. And so he used to just beat the crap out of me. My whole thing was, you practice all that, and I just got beaten up, because he figures okay, but what happened is, I went, after I graduated, I went to grad school, and there wasn't a lot of Aikido, so there was a Kempo karate club, so I did some there. I went to the Kempo karate club, and it was really funny. They had black belts there, and I was nothing, and I could take the black belts. All I knew was reverse punch, foot sweep, and they didn't know what to do. I would move in and sweep. I mean, they would try a lot of fancy kicks, and I would just go forward and defend those things. I wouldn't go back on them. I'd go forward until I went in there, and boom. And so I realized that one thing this guy, even though I thought it was total pain, was that, in a sense, I was facing these guys that had a lot of fancy moves, but, I just knew if I went right at them, in other words, one thing that you were kind of taught with the Shotokan was a very aggressive defense. One thing the instructor used to have us do, like, you are attacked, you go back. He would have us practice going forward as the person that was, defending. And so I found those guys would just dance backwards until they lost their balance. And I foot sweep them and just punch them when they were on the ground. They didn't know what to do with me. I never went back because I thought, I don't want to get too good at that dancing around stuff. And this guy was not about dancing around. He was just about pure and simple, it was very linear. But, the whole sense you could be defensive and be linear, and then you finish off with a move. And I could never foot sweep him and get him down, but these guys were easy, And so
my karate sensei used to say that karate was the art of the meanest low-down fighting there was. He was very pragmatic.
Yeah. In other words, if you get too into, just like dancing around, looking like, everybody wants to look like in an action movie, right? I was watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., for example, Ravel, and, what's her name? The Chinese actress. She's beautiful to watch. Ming. Is that her name? Ming? I can't remember. But, she does all these kicks and everything. And you couldn't get away with that. Bruce Lee himself said, real situation, you don't kick any higher than the groin. And, he said the best target is a side kick to the knee because that's the closest target with your strongest weapon. And the longest hand attack is the eye gouge. If you don't like that, flick. If you don't want to take somebody's eye, flick them in the eye. Boom, hit a blow.
Yeah, that was more or less what my sensei said. Like, no reason to ever kick above the waist and probably not above the knee.
Yeah. Well, the thing with
I can speak from personal experience that knees are not very strong in certain directions.
That's correct. It takes 14 pounds of pressure to break a knee.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that part of it, Bruce Lee said,
I've done it to myself without any help.
Yeah. Well, time and circumstance, right? And the whole thing there, it was easy. I mean, I was kind of, all this dancing around and everything. If you look at Bruce Lee, for example, he could be really solid. I mean, that whole thing, since I said, as hard as a diamond, as flexible as a willow, as fluid as water, or as empty as space. Yeah, that's all imagination. I mean, the single thing, that with Diana Rigg, right? I mean, Honor Blackman did a little bit of it. But internationally, it was Diana Rigg. The show kind of spread internationally. They may have shown the British Avengers stuff with Honor Black when I watched them, and they're really good. But the Diana Rigg episode, she kind of had a broader sense of things. Like she handled the humor really well. But more than anything else, I mean, something you sort of have to have as an actor or actress is imagination. That was one thing. I mean, I haven't watched a lot of her stuff when she's a lot older, but she could play almost anything. And her use of language was like incredible. I mean, what is this? George Unwin requests a pleasure. Unwin the millionaire. It's the way that, she spoke the way Chet Baker played.
Well, there's a reason she got knighted.
Well, yeah, I mean that, that one movie, Midsummer Night's Dream, Judi Dench, what's her name?
Who also got knighted.
Yeah, and oh gosh, what's her name? She played in that Prime Suspect thing on Helen Mirren. All three are in that one Peter Brook film. And that was the first thing Diana Rigg did when she left the Avengers. She actually went back to Shakespeare. Then she did a movie called Assassination Bureau Limited with Oliver Reed, which is actually, if you watch it, it's a fun film, And then, I guess after that, what did she do? She did The Hospital with George C. Scott. And then she did On Her Majesty's Secret Service with George Lazenby. He's probably the worst Bond. But what was interesting was, there was a thing he wrote where, there was a whole thing about how they didn't get along and everything, which might have been true. We don't know. But he said, oh, that was just the newspapers looking for something to say. And he really gave a very warm appreciation of her. And he said, as much as, in the movie, when she passes on, he cries. Okay? Which is surprising because his whole thing was very wooden. Okay? But he cries in the film. Managed to get him to be able to do that. But he said when he heard that in real life, yesterday she passed on, he cried, he wept. And so I wrote the comment to that. He finally became Bond. Because I went through that whole film thinking, he's not worthy of you, Diana. He's really not. He's really not. So finally, when he kind of, that article about him came up, I said, yeah, he's finally Bond. So anyway, I think, I don't know what else to say. It's just, that area, where soul over mind. Soul over mind is an important one. Nadosa and I, we had our usual go around yesterday. And, ironically, it was around, what you would call goddess energy. Mother, the divine mother, the whatever you want to call it, the Izanami to Izanagi, the Amaterasu to Susano. And so it was ironic, we talked about it that day, yesterday, which is the day she crossed, right? And, I was just trying to tell them, I don't know that you can understand that force. It's not that you can't, but you have a sense of it. If you were to ask Diana Rigg, how are you going to play this character? she might not be able to, she would have a sense of it and she would speak from that sense. And, you know, in fact, she was asked once in an interview, she says, what do you do when you're asked to play a character that is so different from who you are? And her reply was, I really have to start to feel who I am. And then the other character makes sense. Not trying to figure the character out there, grounding, centering in your own being, your own soul, so to speak, and then letting that other character come through that. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that I've always felt was important. So when I heard, you know, Baker say about the young trumpeters, you know, I called them the young tigers, you know, and there was a man that I met named Graham Bruce, who was a trumpeter, very, very brilliant trumpeter that nobody's heard of, basically, but he lives in Sonoma. He was somebody who played with Baker. And of course, he couldn't make a living doing music, so he kind of sold out and went to high tech. And so he says, Jack, now I have a retirement and insurance and stuff, because, you know, but he still plays, you know. And he just said that Baker was, what am I trying to say? There was something about that with him. That oh yeah, he said, you know, it's like pickup basketball. You get a bunch of musicians, especially young tigers together, and they're all showing off. You know? And so he said, Jack, Baker would play a couple of soft little notes. Let us know what music was and shut us all up. That's what he said. Joe would try to go out there, no, you guys are blowing it. This is what you do. We're just going to go with a couple of soft little notes. One of the things I tried to explain to the sensei is Baker could take a long note, make it seem like that, or he could take that note and make it seem like that. So, Diana Rigg was the same way with her diction. You know, what was it? How happy are some others be to Athens? I am not as fair as she, but what of that? Demetrius thinks not. So I used to like listen to her, you know, do Shakespeare or something, and it was, you know, I mean, it's a little bit like Patrick Stewart during Shakespeare. Because all of a sudden, you know, they have such a soul feeling for the diction and the words, you know, and it's a form of what O-sensei called kototama. You know, that actual language has power to it if the soul that is speaking that language is feeling itself through those words. And, you know, we do the same thing with movement, you know, move like a beam of light, fly like lightning, strike like thunder, move in circles around a stable center. Tai Chi, Aikido, that's kind of what we do. And so if you read O-sensei's stuff, I think what he was trying to say is, okay, keep going, train the body, understand the patterns, train your mind and your body, but you're ultimately trying to get in touch with yourself at a deeper soul level. And then the imagination, the motive power of creation comes through your mind into your body. Into your body. Stephen Curry, he says, all these. Well, in some sense, you know, what you're doing, by the time you go that way, somebody reads it, I'm thinking I'm going to do it. Boom, you do it a little better, but all of a sudden, boom, boom. And I was watching an interview with Mike Krzyzewski, you know, who was the coach at Duke University, and he said about Curry, he just said, his moves are really unduplicatable because they are so quintessentially him. You cannot copy Stephen Curry, but boom, 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 boom. Soul over mind, soul over mind, soul over mind. And so, when we look at O Sensei, yeah, of course, he, had a very, very well-developed mental sense and an extremely trained physical to support that. But there was that extra bit, soul over mind. So that's, I've always been attracted to those people, whether it's Chet Baker or Diana Rigg, or, currently, I mean, even though he's, getting up there years basketball-wise, but Stephen Curry. Motion, so there's body, but creativity. Not just the mind organizing bit, but the actual. So when you're doing the actual movements with the staff, you're just allowing, it's almost like the staff is leading. And you get a little, start to lose control, and that's kind of scary for eye. But as the eye gets used to it, then the movements, boom, you start to boom, they start to boom. So again, you get the move like a beam of light. Boom, fly like lightning. Boom, strike like thunder. That comes out of the soul. As best I can do that. Okay? And you can't figure soul out. But soul starts to come through. After all, soul leads. Mind goes here, mind goes there, mind gets better at, the body gets better following the mind. The soul, boom, can keep both those directions, boom, and up and down, boom. And be in the moment and be very creative. Or in Diana Rigg's case, just with diction, boom, she could bring that out. She touched the whole generation. I'm sure a lot of guys yesterday about my age really just felt a lot of angst when they found out that she crossed over. I was going, wow. Yeah. Anyway, that's it.
I had one follow-up thought talking about people moving.
Yeah.
One of the advantages of marrying a ballet dancer, she does it amateur for fun, but she does it, is that I got introduced to a lot of ballet. And there's a guy in San Francisco named Alonzo King.
Alonzo King. Okay.
Alonzo King, and his ballet studio is called Lines Ballet. He's got a whole troupe. And he's older now and doesn't dance, but he teaches, and he did a Q&A with the audience, and I forget what Q I asked and what A he answered me, but I remember the sense of it was that he was thinking of movement in this entirely other plane, way. So I would recommend for anyone interested in movement, looking up some of it. I noticed on YouTube, I just checked, he's got a couple of open classes he taught. You can go watch him teach, or you could see his students who are the professional Lines Ballet performers, right? He does the choreography. They're not really students, they're pros, but he does the choreography for them. And he first came to attention because people like Zakir Hussain, who is one of the tabla maestros who studied with my sitar teacher, who was the teacher with my sitar teacher, Zakir Hussain, he composed music for Lines Ballet and played live. And that was great because the first time we saw Lines Ballet, Debbie was there for the ballet and I was there for the Indian music. And we both did something, up our alley. But I really like his choreography and his sense of he's similar to O Sensei in the sense that when he talks about movement, you'd have absolutely no idea what he's talking about, because he's just, he's on this level.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there because you were talking about how various actors and athletes moved and how inspiring that was. And the ballet form might seem very rigid and constraining, but he finds a freedom within it.
Wow. So okay, Alonzo King.
Alonzo King, yeah, Lines Ballet. I couldn't find any videos of him like as a young man, but I could find stuff from Lines
Yeah.
Ballet choreography he did.
Yeah, no, that part of it's emotion or diction or music. They're all kind of, I mean, I used to try to walk like Diana Rigg, which is hard to do because you're kind of like 5 foot, whatever. She's tall. She's not quite 6 feet tall, but she was listed, I think, about 5'9", and then somebody said, but without high heels, she's almost like eye to eye with McNee, who's 6'2". So women sometimes it's like basketball players, they want to be listed as higher, taller. Women a lot of times, want to be listed as, I used to tell my daughter, you're going to grow to be 7 foot tall. And then when she was young, she was going pretty fast, right? And then after a while, she said, Dad, I don't want to be 7 foot tall. I would say that just to kind of inspire her because she was getting big, right? And I just realized, okay, there are a lot of times she didn't want to be 7 foot tall because, basically she would kind of stand out. Diana Rigg, actually, I think somebody wrote an article about her. Tall redheads always get caught, and she did something, I guess, one time when she was kind of in prep school, where she was brought into, basically had her sit down, and she's had her oatmeal in front of her, and they were reprimanding her because she'd done this and that. And this is apparently something that happened a lot with her because she was tall. And she was redheaded, so she stood out, right? And so all the, her teachers, principal, authority figures, and so she looks at them, and there's the oatmeal. And she goes like this. And the bowl flies all the way to the ceiling. And the oatmeal sticks there. And it is a tall ceiling. And the oatmeal hardens. And for the whole term, that bowl is there. And the way somebody kind of put it, they titled an article about her. It says, Diana Rigg's Healthy Disrespect. And so, I always taken that to heart, I guess. I don't know. Healthy. A certain amount of it is healthy.
Well, oatmeal's healthy, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that was something I just thought was a very cool story. I mean, I somewhere, I know that the Max Prendergast character, in fact, later, it's interesting, the guy who directed the first Batman film was going to do a British Avengers film with Mel Gibson as John Steed. And there are a couple of scenes in the first Batman, Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson one, where this clock. And they're in the episode The Joker. Of course, the Joker, Jack Nicholson, right? They didn't, this wasn't about the DC villain, the Joker. This is about this mad war criminal guy that really wanted to kill Emmett Peele. And the other one that's interesting in there is that they have this picture of Diana Rigg, and he takes some scissors and just cuts it up. And, and then what happens in the TV show, they show the clock later, so you realize that's where he's hiding. And he kind of lures her there. And that's one of the scariest episodes, even though it has nothing to do with, the DC character, the Joker, that's the title of it. But in that film, it's kind of like, Jack Nicholson is kind of stalking Kim Basinger, and he takes the scissors and cuts her photo out. Then he starts cutting everything up. And so, there are a lot of, I kind of looked at that, and I can't remember, Jack Weintraub or somebody, he was supposed to do an Avengers movie with, the other actor, the Australian, Mel Gibson, but it didn't happen. And so what happened is that he did it later with Ray Fiennes and Uma Thurman and totally butchered it. Totally. I mean, Uma Thurman is okay. The rest of the film is just awful. I mean, if they'd given the script to me, I would have said, look, you're really blowing it with the way you're editing and everything. This is what you got to do. You have 8 fight scenes with Ray Fiennes and 1 or 2 with Uma Thurman. You reverse it. You do not make Ray Fiennes the motive force of the movie. The motive force of the movie is Emma Peel. And if you get that wrong, that's the whole thing. If you get the woman wrong, the Avengers doesn't work. Honor Blackman, it worked. Diana Rigg, it worked. Linda Thorson, no. Later, they did a remake called The New Avengers, Joanna Lumley. Better than Linda Thorson, still didn't work. In fact, what happened with Patrick McNee is he's in San Francisco and he bumps into one of Diana Rigg's friends. And she said, well, Patrick, what are you doing here on the West Coast? And so he said, oh, just finalizing a deal to do the Avengers again. And so this lady looks at him and says, is Diana in it? He says, no. And then she looks at him and says, then it won't be any good. And he was right. I mean, it was okay, it was watchable somewhat. But the only reason I watched that show was hoping that Mrs. Peel would be in it at some point. And they did one little scene with her, which was a cut from an earlier thing when she was actually, so it wasn't new footage. But she was in it very briefly. So I watched a whole season of it just to watch that, Anyway, we're gonna go. So I thank you all. Okay, take care.
Thank you, Sensei. Thank you,
Okay.
David.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Hope you're feeling better than Wednesday.
I'm fine.
Good.
I'm fine. I'm pretty sure it was just, air quality was this whole week I've been feeling kind of like sleeping all the time.
Air quality today has just got awful.
Yep.
And oh my gosh, I found a new website a friend of mine turned me on to. Barry, Barry Kirchhoff. Barry posted about purpleair.com, which shows you the sensors local to your house. So you can just like cruise around this map, and then you see all the numbers for all the sensors that are just like wherever you live. But the number that it comes up with is